Hi everyone, my name is Michaela Roberts and I decided to do a video for my presentation on the current events topics. I chose the writings, sorry I have my notes here so I don't forget anything, but I chose the writings by Adorno and Horkheimer, The Culture, Industry, Enlightenment, and Mass Deception. I actually really liked this reading compared to maybe some other things that we have covered. I actually liked reading the work. So I guess I'm going to start with a little bit of a summary of what Adorno and Horkheimer are talking about. They are really focused on fighting conformity, that we live in a system that is pushing us to conform to a certain view and that we have very little choice in participating in that. So they talk specifically about the media and media culture and how that all of that is controlled and regulated to make us think and behave a certain way. So, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, I don't know why. But essentially that culture is patterning us. And that we pacify our society with mindlessness, and we're socialized not to be able to recognize larger issues in society. And so I think, to me, kind of the overarching theme that arose in these writings that I kind of viewed was propaganda. And of course, Adorno and Horkheimer are writing in the 1940s. This is released in the midst of World War II. And so they had, been able to see, they are, from Europe originally, and they're able to see, Nazi propaganda. The German Nazi Party were great at running a propaganda system and making the people think a certain way and engage a certain way. And they had witnessed that and witnessed how the work to, sorry, someone was knocking on the door, I guess I got really distracted, but how the Nazi Party was able to use film and media and radio to make the German people think a certain way and to fall into compliance with the movement of the Nazi Party. And then at this time, they fled Nazi Germany, and they are in the United States in the 1940s, and similarly, in the United States in that time, the U.S. government is running a propaganda campaign. The U.S. government in the 1940s is spending tons of money and resources to push Hollywood to make films that depict the United States a certain way. So if you've seen a lot of films from the 1940s, there's a whole category of them that are just strictly American military propaganda. You can watch the movie Anchors Aweigh with Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra. They get these big stars to make films where all of the stars are in the Navy. All of the issues surround American militarism and their greatness. And the U.S. government was sponsoring that. They were pushing production companies to make American military films and to really push in every asset, not just in film, but in commercialism, in advertising, to really present the American military a certain way. This is what Adorno and Horkheimer are witnessing then in the 40s, and I think that this is still, extremely relevant today. But I think that maybe a lot of people it may not appear to be as obvious as it was in the 40s, American military propaganda in the media. For example, even now, the Department of Defense does sponsor large-scale film productions. These include, the Top Gun franchise. It's reported by some that when the original Top Gun film released, that Navy recruitment went up over 400% because of the mass popularism of that film and the way that those movies present being in the Navy and glamorizes that in the media. What may not be known is that the United States government did subsidize the production of the Top Gun films. They want to use accurate depictions of military uniforms. They need planes and tanks and all of these things for these big budget films. And the US government subsidizes the costs of those things and those equipment in order to be depicted a certain way in the films. Pretty much, you can if you depict the American military in a positive light and as the hero in these stories, then we're going to let you use the fighter jets that you need to film Top Gun and make it as accurate as possible and, like, make it a blockbuster and make it look amazing. I had found a quote by Tanner Mearleys, who is an assistant professor at Ontario Tech University, and he studies a lot of media propaganda, and that's kind of his specialty. And he is quoted as saying that no country in the world churns out as many images of itself as the military hero like the United States does. That is a unique cultural phenomenon. Many of Hollywood's films are embedded in the American military and made to glorify the American military. And he's looking at the situation as an outsider. He's Canadian, and he is pointing that it is unique to the United States to have so much military glorification in film and entertainment, and that is unique to Americanism. It's not something that is seen in a lot of other countries, maybe with the only other comparisons being, countries like the USSR, who in the past did create mass propaganda schemes. And so he's kind of drawing a comparison to, we look at propaganda in terms of, we think of Nazi Germany and we think of communist countries that want to push their agenda, but we are incapable of seeing that same level of propaganda in our own country. And I think that ties to what Adorno and Horkheimer are talking about here, that we're so embedded in the propaganda, we're so embedded in the consumerism and in the conformity that we can't, that if we're not careful, if we're not looking for it, it's hard to see how we're being influenced in that way. Another way, more still on like the political side of the military, similarly, is the United States government's spending on professional sports. I think this became a big hot topic issue back in like 2016, 2017, when it came to players kneeling during the national anthem at the NFL, and that kind of erupted into this big conversation about displays of patriotism in professional sports. And I think another thing, we think of it as normal that we play the national anthem at sporting events, or that we have these big military reunions, or the jet flyovers at NASCAR, that we think of all those things as just the way it is, but in fact, those are sponsored by the US government. It's another form of American military propaganda. In 2015, Senator John McCain from Arizona disclosed to the public, essentially, that the Department of Defense was spending millions of dollars on sponsorship contracts in professional sports. In 2015, he said $5.4 million was paid out. Not in 2000, sorry, rewind. He announced this in 2015, but it was between the years 2012 and 2014. The Department of Defense spent $6.8 million on sports marketing. About $5.4 million of that was paid to 14 NFL teams. This money was supposed to be used for things like military flyovers, flag unfurlings, color guard ceremonies, enlistment campaigns, and national anthem performances. Total, in that amount of time, the Department of Defense spent at least $10.4 million on marketing and ad contracts with professional sports teams. So this is, when you're watching the Super Bowl and one of the commercials is going to be an enlistment campaign for the Navy or for the Army, the U.S. government is paying for that airtime, and they're paying for the ad contracts. This has changed more recently. So beginning in 2015, the Department of Defense has started prohibiting and reeling in certain types of military payouts for patriotic ceremonies. But I still think that, it's again an example, like Adorno and Horkheimer are talking about, that if you don't think about it, it's just in our mass media. It's in the leisure media. It's in the films that we watch. It's in the sports that we enjoy, we're getting the subliminal messages of American militarism and nationalism and patriotism, and that is manufactured. That's not genuine. It's something that, like Adorno and Horkheimer talk about. They say, quote, any trace of spontaneity from the public in official broadcasting is controlled and absorbed by professionals. Culture impresses the same stamp on everything. So, and they say also, quote, that the man with leisure has to accept what the culture manufacturers offer him. Essentially saying, we don't have a choice but to consume the media that is fed to us, and that media pushes a narrative of conformity. I think another big area in our modern culture that this is applicable to is influencer culture. I think with the rise of social media here, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, we saw the takeover of influencer culture, where brands and corporations began paying influencers, big social media personalities, and these kind of C-level celebrities to push and promote products. And they do that in a way that makes it seem very natural. It's a little bit more hidden than just, you should use this product. But it's like, they are living this idealistic life. They are, they've made it. Their lives are perfect, and they use these products. And so if you want to live this sort of life, you should use these products. They really kind of connect with their audiences on a personal level, that you feel like this person, their life, you are connected to them, and they are using these products. And I think what's kind of behind the scenes in that is, again, that is manufactured. In 2020, between $5 and $10 billion was spent on influencer marketing. That means that brands all over the world spent up to $10 billion total paying influencers to promote products to the people. And, that is a sign, of that's capitalism. That is the capitalist culture working its way into our minds in a way that it feels normalized and feels like this is just how it is, and we can't see the difference in that. Another kind of area they talk about, and that Dr. Busby talked about in the podcast on these, is that, people now have shorter attention spans, lower reading levels, and this creates, a less intelligent body that is disempowered in society. They're incapable of working against the system. I think the ways that we see this now include things like the school-to-prison pipeline. People talk about the school-to-prison pipeline a lot, but I think this is an example of this kind of indoctrination into the system. And it's, you have groups of students who are low-performing in school, are usually from disadvantaged minority backgrounds. School does not provide the resources that they need to advance in life, and they end up through one means or the other in prison. And this happens so often that there is now intellectual terms for it. It is recognized as a systemic problem. But I think the school-to-prison pipeline keeps the population, especially disadvantaged minority populations, from being able to excel in society. It keeps them disenfranchised. If you have a felony, you can't vote. It keeps them from being able to grow capital because, it's difficult to get a job if you have a felony conviction. And so it keeps this group of the population systemically displaced and disadvantaged. And it also provides an inexpensive form of labor to large corporations in the form of prison labor. A lot of activism work has been done on this topic. Similarly, even outside of the realm of prison, I think that the educational system struggles or is developed in a way to make it difficult to excel. In order to revolt against the government, in order to have a revolution, as Marx and Engels were thinking, or in order to use the democratic intellectual process to change the government, you're going to need a highly educated population to do that. But, our modern school system is making students less literate. They have with shorter attention spans and shorter vocabularies. It's extremely expensive to get a higher education in the United States because we don't have a universal higher education system. And so it's very expensive, and for many the only way to do that is to take out an exorbitant amount of loans to be able to afford it. So even people who are educated are tied down financially and are going to have a more difficult time building capital and things like that, because now they owe thousands and thousands of dollars for the education that they got. And I think that all of these things work together to create the kind of society that Adorno and Horkheimer are talking about, a society that is alienated and conformed, that they can't think for themselves, they can't resist the government or even recognize the bigger problems in the world because they're so overwhelmed with making ends meet. The working class is so consumed in working hard enough to make ends meet that they don't have the time or the energy or the capacity to rise up against the government or to rise up against the bourgeoisie. So I actually really thought that this was interesting. I hope this wasn't too much information, but I did see that the work of Adorno and Horkheimer is relevant in today's society, and you can really see that even though this was written in the 1940s, the same sort of propaganda and conformity and the lack of individualism that they're talking about in 1944, I think is definitely relevant today in 2023. So thank you.